All right, then let's go back to the actual text then, beginning on page 321. And so this again is the shining the light of wisdom. And so the first one there talking is a category called images of wisdom. And the first one is the wisdom as light, which we already really referred to, that it illuminates our understanding. And then the second one is wisdom as a knife. And this is where it cuts through our ignorance, is the metaphor there that it's referring to. And then on the next page, which I'm going to skip over, it talks about the conditions for wisdom. What are the kind of things that go into that? We referred to that already, so we won't go over that so much. But then this next section, I want to talk a little bit more about the discourse on right view. I think this is one of the more important ones in this section of the text, so we'll spend a little bit of time on this, even though it's fairly long. He begins again, "Thus I have heard, the Blessed One was living at Shavati in Jedis Cove, Anathapindika's park. There the Venerable Shariputra addressed the monks thus, 'Friends, monks, friend,' they replied. The Venerable Shariputra then said this," and then skipping down to the last line there, "Friends, listen and attend closely to what I shall say." And they reply to that. But here we get into these different categories, which is the important part of this. The categories are not in the original text, hence they're in the brackets. But the first one here is wholesome and unwholesome, which we've referred to again, which we referred to in some cases in terms of virtue and non-virtue and so forth. I tend to like the words wholesome and unwholesome here, but we're basically talking about issues that we refer to as ethics. And so when a noble disciple understands the unwholesome and the root of the unwholesome, he is one of right view. So very important we understand both the actual unwholesome and the cause or the root of that. In the next paragraph, number 4 there, the unwholesome then, and then he gives a list starting on the 3rd line, is the destruction of life, taking what is not given, sexual misconduct, false speech, malicious speech, harsh speech, idle chatter, covetousness, ill will, and wrong view. Now, these are the ones that come out of the list of 10 non-virtuous and virtuous actions, as opposed to the list of the 5 for lay practitioners that we looked at previously. And you'll notice here that doesn't include alcohol in this list. Okay, don't know why. I've never seen an explanation for why that's not in this list, but it's not. Paragraph 5 there, what is the root then of the unwholesome? Greed, hatred, and delusion. Okay, so these are the 3 poisons. In the paragraph number 6, what about the wholesome then? So those are the unwholesome things. And then what is wholesome? Abstinence from destruction of life, abstinence from taking what is not given, abstinence from sexual misconduct, and so forth. So it's just don't do the things that are in the list of the unwholesome. In paragraph 7, what is the root? Basically the same approach. Not greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. Okay? So then in paragraph 8, when a noble disciple has thus understood, skipping a line, he entirely abandons the underlying tendency to lust. He abolishes underlying tendency to aversion, extirpates the underlying tendency to view and conceit. I am, and by abandoning ignorance and arousing true knowledge, he here now makes an end of suffering. Okay, so helpful guidelines there. So about explaining a little better about the wholesome and unwholesome and how that fits together, the roots of those, and what are the issues to be addressed, and what happens when we address those issues. The next category is an odd term. I'm not sure exactly why he used this, but nutriment. Usually referring to food, but in some cases it could be other forms of nutriment, I guess. In general, the way it's used here, you might say, is the various sources upon which we depend to live. So monks delighted and rejoiced. Then they asked him, "But, friend, might there be another way in which the noble disciple is of right view and has arrived at this true Dharma?" There might be, friends. When a noble disciple understands nutriment, the origin of nutriment, the cessation of nutriment, the way leading to the cessation of nutriment, in that way he is one of right view. And in paragraph 11, and what is nutriment, the origin, cessation, and the way leading to the cessation? There are 4 kinds. They are, then, physical food. So that one is included here. And then contact, mental volition, the intention or the willful choice, and consciousness. And so those are the 4. With the arising of craving, there is the arising of nutriment. With the cessation of craving, there is the cessation of nutriment. The way leading to the cessation is the Noble Eightfold Path. So again, here it fits back into this other set of categories that he combines to call nutriment. And then in paragraph 12, when a noble disciple has thus understood nutriment, skipping a line, he entirely abandons the underlying tendency to lust, some kind of a really strong desire. He makes an end of suffering. In that way, too, a noble disciple is one of right view. So first we looked at wholesome and unwholesome and the 10 virtues, and here we looked at lust and craving and the Noble Eightfold Path. So the next category are the four Noble Truths. Monks then delighted and rejoiced over that part of the teachings from Shariputra. Then they asked him, might there be yet another way that the noble disciple is one of right view? And he says, yes, there is, when a noble disciple understands suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering, he is one of right view. So as we understand the Four Noble Truths, then we also have right view. Paragraph 15, what is suffering? And he gives the traditional list: birth, aging, illness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, despair, not to get what one wants. In brief, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. What is the origin? It is the craving that leads to these, accompanied by delight and lust. What is the cessation? The remainderless fading away and cessation, giving up and relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-attachment. There's a key word, non-attachment to those things. And the way, what is the way? It's, again, the Noble Eightfold Path. So now we've looked at several different categories here. So the next one then is, he goes into the 12 links of dependent origination here and divides those into, each link is basically looked at separately here. So here he begins with aging and death. So this is a little bit different than the list that we looked at in the commentary, which started with ignorance. So here we're starting with aging and death. So these lists sometimes begin in a different place, but it's a circle, so you can start almost anywhere in that sense. But aging and death is the one he starts with here. And so again they asked, might there be another way? And he says, when noble disciple understands aging and death, its origin, cessation, and the way. The aging, in paragraph 22 here, third line, aging of beings, brokenness of teeth, grayness of hair, wrinkling of skin, decline of life, weakness of faculties. These are the things called aging. The passing of beings means passing away, breakup, disappearance, dying, completion of time, breakup of the aggregates, lying down of the body. This is called death. So usually any one of those would constitute, but in some cases it's combinations of those things. With the arising of birth, there is the arising of aging and death. So when we're born, aging and death is going to happen, although some people die at very young ages. But they're still in the process of aging from the moment of birth. With the cessation of birth, there is the cessation of aging and death. The way is the Noble Eightfold Path. When the noble disciple has thus understood aging and death, the origin, cessation, and the way, he here and now makes the end of suffering. So again, but the aging and death aspect of the 12 links. The next part is then birth. So we age, we die, so the next step is being reborn. Here they ask again if there might be another way, and he says, yes, there might be. When a noble disciple understands birth, the origin of birth, cessation of birth, the way leading to the cessation of birth, in that way he is of right view. You get to see the pattern here? It fits in with the Four Noble Truths. So what is birth? In paragraph 27 at the bottom, when a noble disciple has understood birth, the origin, the cessation, the way leading to the cessation, he here and now makes an end of suffering. In that way, too, a noble disciple is of one right view. And then on the next page we have a category called existence. This refers to the 3 realms or spheres of existence. So that really talks about, that term usually refers to the subject, object, and action, so making the connection. So you are the object or subject, and that's the object. No, it's the other way around. You are the object, and that is the subject, and then the action is the connection between the two here. And so in the first paragraph, they ask him another question, if there might be another way, and again he says there might be. Number 29, when a noble disciple understands existence, its origin, cessation, the way, then we have right view. So what is existence? There are 3 kinds of existence: the sense sphere, form sphere, and formless sphere. So in that case, it's talking about the 3 realms of existence: the desire realm, form realm, and formless realm. With the arising of clinging, there is the arising of existence. With the cessation of clinging, there is the cessation of existence. And then the way is, of course, the Noble Eightfold Path. Then clinging is the next one, meaning to hold on to something that we have. So there's a further question about this by the group, and he says, when a noble disciple understands clinging, and there are 4 kinds of those in paragraph 34, clinging to sensual pleasures, clinging to views, clinging to rules and observances, and clinging to a doctrine of self, or the Atman in that case. So the rules and observances are probably a reference to the Vedas, with all the rules about purification that they have as a part of that, and specific rituals and observances that have to be done as a part of that, as well as those related to being in the more extreme forms of asceticism, the self-discipline required for that. And then he goes on to say, with the arising of craving, the arising of clinging, cessation to craving, cessation of clinging, the way then is the Noble Eightfold Path. So we have clinging, the origin, the cessation, and the way. That then too is the noble disciple of one right view. So then we go on to craving. Clinging, we want it; craving, we have it, and we want to hold on to it. So or craving we want, excuse me. Clinging we have it, we hold on to it, but craving we desire it and want it. So is there another way? Well, yes, craving with the origin, cessation, and the way, and so forth. Then here he gives 6 classes in paragraph 38. Craving for forms, sounds, odors, flavors, tactile objects, and mental phenomena. So the 5 sense consciousnesses, basically. With the arising of feeling, there's arriving craving. The cessation of feeling, the cessation of craving. And the way, of course, is the Eightfold Path. The next category then are feelings. And so again, they ask the question, is there yet another way? And yes, there is another way, and that is feeling. And so what is feeling? And he gives 6 classes of feeling. Feeling born of eye contact, things that we see, making a connection with them. Feeling of ear contact, sounds. Then feeling of nose contact, the tongue contact, the body contact, the mind contact. Then with the arising of contact, there is the arising of feeling. With the cessation of contact, the cessation of feeling. And the way, of course, is the Noble Eightfold Path. The next in the links is contact. And here's the one that refers to the 3 spheres in terms of subject-object action. So ask that question. He says, yes, there is another way. When the noble disciple understands contact, its origin, cessation, and the way. And what is contact? And he gives again 6 classes: eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue, body, mind. So with the arising of the 6 sense bases, there is the arising of contact. And then there is the 6 sense bases. There is the cessation of contact. And then the way is the Noble Eightfold Path. So then he goes on in the next page, 331, the 6 sense bases. So these are actually the eyes, ears, and so forth. So we've gone through several different levels of those things here. Similar categories, different aspects of the similar categories. So they ask again, is there something else? And Shariputra says, when a noble disciple understands the 6 sense bases, their origin, cessation, and the way. What are those? These are the 6. The eye base, ear base, nose, tongue, body, mind. So the arising of name and form, there is the arising of the 6 sense bases. The cessation of name and form, there is the cessation of the 6 sense bases. And then the way is the Noble Eightfold Path. So with name and form is the next one. Name and form basically is labeling things, giving names to things. So there's a thing, that's the form part, and then giving it a name is the label. So they ask about another way, and then he says, noble disciple understands name and form, its origin, cessation, and the way. And what is name and form? He gives a list again. Feeling, perception, volition, contact, attention. These are called name. The 4 great elements and form derived from the 4 great elements are called form. So this is name and form. They are called name and form. Arising of consciousness, the arising of name and form, the cessation of consciousness, the cessation of name and form, and then the way is the Noble Eightfold Path. So in the above, we had this consciousness. So the consciousness activity here includes the 6 forms and some kind of intentional action. So they ask again about this, and he replies, when a noble disciple understands consciousness, the origin, cessation, and the way. And what is consciousness? The 6 classes of consciousness are eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose, tongue, body, mind again. So with the arising of volitional formations, intentional kinds of formations, the arising of consciousness, the cessation of volitional formations, there is the cessation of consciousness, the way is the Noble Eightfold Path. So then we go on to volitional formations. Volitional usually refers to intention or will or making a choice in some way. In here, it looks like it's referring primarily to making choices in terms of body, speech, and mind. So they ask the further question, and Shariputra says, when a noble disciple understands volitional formations, then also one can come to right view. What are the volitional formations? There are three kinds: bodily volitional formation, and verbal volitional formation, and mental volitional formation. The arising of ignorance, arising of volitional formations, leads to the cessation of ignorance, the cessation of volitional formations. The way, then, is the Noble Eightfold Path. Then we talk about ignorance, and here referring to understanding the Four Noble Truths. So they ask yet again if there's another way, and he says that when the noble disciple understands ignorance, the origin, cessation, and the way leading to the cessation of ignorance, then one understands right view. What is ignorance then? Not knowing about suffering, not knowing about the origin of suffering, not knowing about the cessation of suffering, not knowing about the way leading to the cessation of suffering. This is called ignorance. So arising of the taints, the arising of, with that, then there's the arising of ignorance. The way to the cessation of ignorance is the Noble Eightfold Path. And so finally in our list we get actually to the taints themselves. The three poisons, for example, various afflictive emotions, mental obscurations, those kind of things are often referred to as taints. So here in paragraph 69, after they ask yet again if there's another way, he says, when, friends, a noble disciple understands the taints, the origin of those, the cessation of those, the way leading to that cessation, he is of right view. So what are the taints? There are three: sensual desire, existence, the desire to continue existence in the three realms, and ignorance. So with the arising of ignorance, we have the arising of the taints. The cessation of ignorance is the cessation of the taints, and the way to cessation of taints is the Noble Eightfold Path. So when a disciple has thus understood, he entirely abandons the underlying tendency to lust, the underlying tendency to aversion, the underlying tendency to the view that and conceit that I am. So here, by abandoning ignorance, he here and now makes an end to suffering.